The transport ship broke through the purple clouds of Velaris Prime, and Maya-chan pressed her face against the window, like a child seeing snow for the first time. She was 17 years old, born in a small town in China, raised by a grandmother who taught her that silence was a weapon and patience was a shield. And now she was about to become the first human ever admitted to the Galactic Coalition Academy. The academy sat on a mountain that seemed to touch the sky itself, with towers made of black stone and windows that glowed with strange blue light. And Maya felt her heart beating fast as the ship descended toward the landing platform, where dozens of alien cadets had gathered to watch her arrival. She knew they were not there to welcome her. When the ship doors opened, Maya stepped out carrying a single bag over her shoulder, and immediately she felt the weight of 100 stairs pressing down on her small frame. The aliens towered over her, some standing 7 feet tall with scales covering their bodies, others with 4 arms and skin the color of dark metal, and still others with no visible eyes at all, but somehow she knew they were watching her with something between curiosity and disgust. A Dracorian male pushed through the crowd and stopped directly in her path, his red scales gleaming under the twin suns, and he looked down at her with yellow eyes that held no warmth at all. "So this is the human," he said, and his voice was deep like thunder rolling across mountains. "I expected something more impressive." Laughter spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Maya said nothing, keeping her expression calm and her eyes forward, and she simply walked around the Dracorian and continued toward the main building where she could see an instructor waiting. The Dracorian grabbed her arm and spun her around with enough force to make her stumble. "I was speaking to you, creature," he growled, and his claws dug slightly into her flesh. "On my world, ignoring royalty is punishable by death." Maya looked at his hand on her arm, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his gaze, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I apologize for any offense," she said. "I am still learning your customs." She bowed her head slightly, and after a long moment, Dracorian released her with a snort of contempt. "Learn faster, human," he said, "or your time here will be very short." Maya continued walking without looking back, and she did not let her expression change, even though her arm was throbbing where his claws had broken the skin. The instructor waiting at the entrance was also Dracorian, though older and larger than the one who had grabbed her, with scars crossing his face and scales that had faded to a dull gray with age. His name was Varnock, and he had spent 40 years training the finest warriors the galaxy had ever known. And he looked at Maya-chan the way a mountain might look in a single falling leaf. "Human," he said, not bothering with her name. "Follow me." He turned and walked into the building without checking if she followed, and Maya had to jog to keep up with his massive strides as they moved through corridors filled with ancient weapons and portraits of legendary warriors. "You are here because the Council believes humans deserve a chance to prove themselves," Varnock said without looking at her. "I opposed your admission personally, but I was overruled. So now I am forced to pretend you belong here." Maya remained silent. "The Academy has trained warriors for over 2,000 years, he continued. "We have never failed to produce excellence, and we have never accepted weakness. So you will either rise to our standards or you will be removed. Do you understand?" "Yes, Instructor," Maya said. Varnock stopped suddenly and turned to face her, and up close she could see that his eyes were not just yellow but filled with tiny flecks of orange that seemed to burn like dying embers. "Your species is young," he said. "You have been part of the galactic community for less than 50 years. And in that time you have shown nothing remarkable except an ability to breed quickly and die easily. So tell me, human, why should I waste my time on you?" Maya met his gaze without flinching. "Because I am here," she said simply, "and I will not leave until I have proven myself." Something flickered across Varnock's face, too fast to identify, and then he turned away and continued walking. "Your quarters are in the East Wing," he said. "You will find that you have been given a room alone since no other cadet was willing to share space with a human. And your classes begin tomorrow at dawn. Do not be late." He left her standing in a narrow hallway in front of a door that was smaller and older than any she had passed. And Maya entered her new home to find a room barely large enough for a bed and a desk. The walls were bare stone, the window was cracked, and someone had carved words into the door that she could not read, but somehow understood were not kind. Maya set down her bag and sat on the thin mattress, and for the first time since leaving Earth, she allowed herself to feel the fear that had been building in her chest like water behind a dam. She was alone on an alien world, surrounded by creatures who hated her simply for existing, and she had no friends, no allies, and no guarantee that she would survive the week. But as she sat there in the fading light of the twin suns, Maya remembered what her grandmother had told her the day she left. "The bamboo that bends in the storm survives when the mighty oak falls," the old woman had said. "Let them think you are weak. Let them believe they have won. And when the time comes, you will show them what humans are truly made of." Maya lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would begin her training, and tomorrow she would let them knock her down as many times as they wanted, because every fall would teach her something new, and every bruise would make her stronger. They wanted to see a weak human girl who did not belong? Then that is exactly what she would show them, for now. She closed her eyes and let herself drift towards sleep, and the last thought in her mind before darkness took her was a promise she made to herself and to every human who would come after her. She would not break. She would not quit. She would make them remember her name. 3 months had passed since Maya-chan arrived at the Galactic Coalition Academy, and in that time she had been knocked down more times than she could count. Every morning she woke before dawn and ran the training course, while larger cadets shoved her into walls. Every afternoon she practiced combat drills, while opponents twice her size threw her across the arena like a broken toy. Every evening she studied in the library, while other students whispered insults just loud enough for her to hear. And every night she returned to her small room covered in bruises that painted her skin in shades of purple and black and yellow. But she never complained. She never cried where anyone could see. She never once asked to go home. The Dracorian prince named Krathvex watched her from across the training arena with eyes that burned like molten gold, and he could not understand why this tiny creature refused to break. Krathvex was royalty from a world that had conquered 12 systems before humans had even learned to make fire, and his family name was spoken with fear across half the galaxy. And he had never in his entire life met something he could not destroy. Yet here was this human girl, this soft pink thing with no claws and no scales and no armor, standing up again and again no matter how many times she fell. It made him angry in a way he could not explain. "She should have quit by now," he said to his companion, a four-armed Vethkai named Taurus who served as his second in command. "Perhaps she is too stupid to know when she is beaten," Taurus replied with a cruel laugh. Krathvex shook his massive head. "No," he said slowly. "There is something else. Something in her eyes that I do not like. Something that watches and waits." "You are thinking too much about a prey animal," Taurus said. "She is nothing. Just ignore her." But Krathvex could not ignore her. He found himself watching Maya constantly, studying the way she moved, noticing how her eyes tracked everything around her, even when she appeared to be focused on something else. He saw how she analyzed each opponent before sparring, how she took note of their fighting styles and weaknesses, how she seemed to catalog every piece of information like a computer storing data. And slowly, without realizing it, Krathvex began to see Maya not as prey, but as something far more dangerous. A predator pretending to be weak. He decided to test his theory. The next day during combat training, Krathvex stepped into the arena and pointed directly at Maya. "I want the human as my sparring partner," he announced, and the entire room fell silent. Instructor Varnock raised one scarred eye-ridge but did not object. "Very well," he said. "Chun, step forward." Maya walked to the center of the arena with her head held high. And if she was afraid of facing the largest and strongest cadet in the academy, she did not show it. Krathvex towered over her by nearly 3 feet, and his arms were thick with muscle, and his claws could tear through metal plates. "Are you ready to learn your place, human?" he asked with a smile that showed rows of sharp teeth. Maya simply nodded and raised her hands into a defensive position. The fight, if it could be called that, lasted less than a minute. Krathvex struck Maya with a backhand that sent her flying across the arena, and before she could recover, he was on top of her, pinning her to the ground with one massive hand. "Submit," he growled. Maya struggled beneath him, her small hands pushing uselessly against his chest. "Submit," he said again, pressing down harder until she could barely breathe. Finally, Maya slapped the ground 3 times in surrender, and Krathvex released her and stood up with a roar of triumph. But as he walked away, he glanced back and saw something that made his scales prickle with unease. Maya was already standing up, and she was not crying or shaking or showing any sign of defeat. Instead, she was watching him with those dark human eyes, and on her bruised face was the smallest hint of a smile. Like she had learned something valuable. Like losing had been part of a plan. From that day forward, Krathvex made Maya his personal target. He cornered her in hallways and pushed her against walls. He broke her equipment during training exercises. He convinced other cadets to refuse her partnership in team drills. He made sure that every single day at the academy was harder for her than it was for anyone else. And through it all, Maya remained quiet and compliant, never fighting back, never complaining, just watching with those patient dark eyes. Instructor Varnock observed these encounters and did nothing to stop them. In his mind, this was natural selection at work, the strong dominating the weak. And if the human could not handle it, then she did not belong at his academy. "She's learning her place," he told the other instructors during a staff meeting. "Soon she will realize she does not belong here and she will leave on her own." But weeks passed, and Maya did not leave. Instead, she seemed to grow calmer with each passing day, more focused, more aware. Varnock began to notice that she was improving faster than any first-year cadet he had ever trained, not in strength or speed, but in technique and efficiency. She was learning to use her small size as an advantage, slipping through gaps that larger fighters could not reach. She was learning to read opponents before they moved, anticipating strikes before they came. She was learning things that the academy did not teach, things she must have figured out on her own, through careful observation. One night, Varnock checked the academy's computer records and discovered that Maya had been accessing the historical combat archives every single night for 3 months. She had watched thousands of hours of footage showing every species' fighting techniques. She had downloaded medical files detailing alien anatomy and biological weaknesses. She had studied more in 3 months than most cadets studied in 3 years. Varnock stared at the screen for a long time, and somewhere deep in his warrior's instincts, a small alarm began to sound. But he dismissed it as foolishness. She was just a human after all, a small soft creature from a small primitive world. What possible threat could she pose? He closed the files and went to bed, and he did not think about Maya-chan again until the day of the combat evaluation. The day everything changed. The day he learned just how wrong he had been about humans. The combat evaluation was the most important event of the academy year. A day when every first-year cadet would demonstrate their skills before the full instructor panel and visiting dignitaries from across the galaxy. Maya woke before dawn on that day and stood by her cracked window watching the twin suns rise over the mountains. and she felt something shift inside her chest like a key turning in a lock. 3 months of pain. 3 months of silence. 3 months of watching and learning and waiting. Today, it would all mean something. She dressed slowly in her training uniform, the same uniform that had been torn and stained so many times she had lost count, and she looked at herself in the small mirror hanging on her wall. The girl looking back at her was different from the one who had arrived on Valorous Prime. Her eyes were harder now, colder, filled with knowledge that had cost her blood and bruises to obtain. Her body was leaner, her movements more controlled, her mind sharper than a blade. She was ready. The main arena was packed with spectators when Maya arrived. Hundreds of aliens from dozens of worlds filling the seats that rose in circles around the central fighting floor. The instructor panel sat on a raised platform at the north end, with Varnock in the center looking severe and ancient in his ceremonial armor. Maya found a spot against the wall and watched as cadet after cadet stepped forward to demonstrate their combat abilities. The Dracorians fought with brutal strength, crushing training dummies with single strikes. The Vethkai used their forearms to attack and defend simultaneously in patterns too fast for most eyes to follow. The telepathic Shalori moved like ghosts, anticipating their opponents before any blow was thrown. Each demonstration earned applause and nods of approval from the panel. And then Krathvex stepped into the arena, and the crowd erupted with cheers. The Dracorian prince was magnificent in his polished armor, his red scales gleaming like fresh blood under the arena lights, and when he raised his arms in greeting, the spectators roared his name. Krathvex. They chanted, Krathvex. He was the star of the academy, the perfect warrior, the future leader who would one day command armies and conquer worlds. And he was looking directly at Maya with a smile that promised pain. For my evaluation, Krathvex announced in a voice that silenced the crowd, I request a live sparring match. Instructor Varnock leaned forward with interest. A bold choice, he said. Who do you wish to face? Krathvex pointed one clawed finger across the arena. The human! A murmur ran through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Maya felt every eye in the stadium turn toward her, some curious, some mocking, some filled with something that might have been pity. Varnock considered for a moment, and Maya could see the calculation behind his ancient eyes. If she was humiliated badly enough in front of the entire academy, she might finally leave. It would solve his human problem without creating a diplomatic incident. Request approved, Varnock announced. Cadet Chen, step forward. Maya walked to the center of the arena with slow, steady steps, and with each step she felt the weight of 3 months lifting from her shoulders. The crowd laughed as she took her position opposite Krathvex. She was so small compared to him, barely reaching his chest, with arms that looked like twigs next to his massive limbs. This is going to be quick, someone in the crowd said loudly. Poor little thing, another voice added. She does not stand a chance. Krathvex looked down at Maya with triumph already glowing in his golden eyes. I'm going to break you, he said quietly so only she could hear. Not just defeat you, but break you so completely that no human will ever dare to set foot in this academy again. Maya looked up at him, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, she let her mask slip. She smiled. Not a small, polite smile like the one she had given before, but a real smile, wide and fierce and filled with teeth. You can try, she said. Something flickered in Krathvex's eyes, something that might have been doubt, but it disappeared quickly behind his wall of arrogance. Rules of engagement, Varnock announced from his platform. Standard academy combat. First to incapacitate or force submission wins. Lethal force is prohibited. Are both parties ready? Krathvex cracked his neck and flexed his claws. Ready. Maya rolled her shoulders and settled into a stance that looked different from anything she had shown before. Lower and more balanced, with her weight centered over her back foot. Ready. Varnock raised his hand. The arena fell completely silent. In that moment of stillness, Maya let her mind expand outward, accessing everything she had learned over 3 months of study and pain. She knew that Dracorians attacked with their right arm first 93% of the time. She knew that their scales were thickest on their chest and back, but thinner around the joints. She knew that there was a nerve cluster beneath the secondary arm joint that could disable half their body if struck correctly. She knew that the point where skull met spine was the single weakest spot on any Dracorian, a gap in their armor that evolution had never closed. She knew 17 different ways to kill him. Tonight she would only need 3. Varnock's hand dropped. Begin. Krathvex charged forward with a roar that shook the arena, and Maya moved. Krathvex had fought 1,000 battles in his life, and in every single one he had been the predator, the unstoppable force that crushed everything in his path. So when the tiny human girl simply disappeared from in front of him, his brain took a full second to understand what had happened. That second cost him everything. Maya had not run away or jumped back like every other opponent he had ever faced. Instead, she had dropped low and moved forward, sliding beneath his outstretched arm like water flowing around a stone. Before Krathvex could turn, Maya's elbow drove into the soft spot beneath his secondary arm joint with surgical precision. The pain was unlike anything he had ever felt. A lightning bolt that shot through his entire right side and turned his muscles to water. His right arm went limp. Krathvex spun with a roar of fury, swinging his left fist in a wild arc that would have crushed Maya's skull if it had connected. But she was not there. She had already moved again, circling behind him while he was still turning, and her foot swept his ankle at the exact moment his weight was unbalanced. The Dracorian prince stumbled, but did not fall, catching himself on his good arm and pushing back to his feet with raw determination. The crowd had gone completely silent. In the VIP section, dignitaries from 12 different worlds leaned forward with disbelief written on their alien faces. On the Instructor platform, Varnock had risen from his seat without realizing it. Krathvex shook his head to clear the pain and focused on the human girl standing 10 feet away. She was not even breathing hard. "Lucky strike," he growled. "It will not happen again." He charged once more, but this time he was careful, watching for her to drop low again. Maya did not drop low. Instead, she stepped to the side at the last possible moment and drove her palm into the sensitive hearing membrane hidden behind his jaw. Krathvex's S-world exploded into ringing white noise. He swung blindly and felt his claws pass through empty air. Something hard struck the back of his knee and his leg buckled. Something else hammered into the nerve cluster on his left side. Both his arms went numb. Krathvex fell to his knees in the center of the arena, a prince of the greatest warrior race in the galaxy, brought down by a creature half his size. He tried to rise, but his body would not obey. He tried to roar, but the pain stole his voice. And then Maya was behind him, her arm wrapped around his throat in a hold that Dracorian physiology had no counter for because no one had ever thought to use it. Her forearm pressed against his windpipe while her other hand gripped the back of his head, and slowly, relentlessly, she began to squeeze. "This is impossible," someone in the crowd whispered. "What is she?" Another voice asked. Krathvex thrashed and bucked, trying to throw Maya off, but she clung to him like a shadow, adjusting her grip with every movement he made. His vision began to darken at the edges. His lungs screamed for air. His pride screamed even louder. "Submit," Maya said, and her voice was calm and quiet, almost gentle, like a mother telling a child to go to sleep. Krathvex would rather die than submit to a human. He gathered every ounce of strength left in his body and threw himself backward, trying to crush Maya beneath his weight. But she had anticipated this. She released her hold at the last second and rolled away, letting his massive body crash to the ground alone. Before Krathvex could recover, Maya was on him again, this time driving her knee into the soft tissue where his skull met his spine. The pain was beyond description. Every Dracorian knew about this spot, this one weakness in their otherwise perfect armor, but it had always been protected by their superior strength and speed. No one had ever actually reached it in combat. Until now. Krathvex's body went rigid as agony flooded through his nervous system. Maya grabbed his head and twisted it to the side, exposing his throat to the arena lights. "Submit," she said again. And this time, her voice was not gentle. It was cold and hard and filled with something that made every spectator in the arena shiver. Krathvex looked up at the faces staring down at him, at the shock and horror in the eyes of his fellow Dracorians, at the fear on the faces of dignitaries who had come expecting to see him triumph. He thought about his family, about his legacy, about everything he had been raised to believe about strength and power and dominance. And then he thought about living. "I submit," he whispered. Maya held him for one more second, just long enough to make sure everyone understood that she was choosing to let him go. Then she released him and stood up. The arena was so quiet that Maya could hear her own heartbeat. Krathvex rolled onto his back and stared at the ceiling, his mighty body broken and his pride shattered into a million pieces. 11 seconds. The entire fight had lasted 11 seconds. Maya turned to face the instructor panel, and she saw Varnock staring at her with an expression she had never seen on a Dracorian face before. Fear. The ancient warrior, veteran of 30 campaigns, conqueror of worlds, was looking at a 17-year-old human girl with genuine fear in his eyes. Maya did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply stood there in the center of the arena, small and soft and covered in old bruises, and waited for what would come next. Because the fight was over, but the lesson was just beginning. For a long moment, no one in the arena moved or spoke. The only sound was Krathvex's ragged breathing as he lay on the ground trying to understand what had just happened to him. Then, Instructor Varnock's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Explain yourself." Maya turned to face the instructor panel, her dark eyes meeting Varnock's yellow gaze without flinching. "Explain what, Instructor?" Varnock descended from the platform with heavy steps, his massive form casting a shadow over Maya as he approached. "How did you do that?" he demanded. No first-year cadet should be able to defeat Krathvex. No human should be able to defeat a Dracorian. It is not possible. Maya looked up at him with an expression that was neither proud nor humble, simply honest. "You made a mistake," she said, and her voice carried across the silent arena so that every spectator could hear. "What mistake?" Varnock growled. Maya began to walk in a slow circle, addressing not just Varnock, but the entire assembly of aliens who had come to watch her fail. "All of you made the same mistake," she said. "You looked at humans and you saw prey. You saw small bodies and short lives. You saw creatures with no claws and no scales and no venom, and you decided that we were weak." She stopped and faced a group of Dracorian dignitaries in the VIP section. "You never asked the most important question." "And what question is that?" Varnock asked. Maya's eyes swept across the crowd. "You never asked how we survived." She let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Earth is not a safe world. It is not a gentle world. It is a planet that has tried to kill us every single day for 200,000 years." She began walking again, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Our world has predators in every environment. Creatures with claws and fangs and poison that hunted us when we were still learning to walk upright." She pointed at the Dracorians. "Your ancestors evolved on a world with weak prey and no competition. But our ancestors shared their world with animals that could tear them apart." She pointed at the Vethkai. Your species developed 4 arms because you face no real threats. But our species developed something better. We developed the ability to adapt. She stopped in the center of the arena and spread her arms wide. Do you know what makes humans dangerous, Instructor Varnock? The old Dracorian said nothing. We are persistent predators. Maya continued. On Earth, we did not hunt by being faster or stronger than our prey. We hunted by following them until they collapsed from exhaustion. Her voice dropped lower but somehow became more intense. We would track an animal for days, never stopping, never resting, just following and following until it could not run anymore, and then we would kill it. She looked directly at Krathvex, who had managed to push himself into a sitting position. That is what I did to you, Krathvex. I let you chase me for 3 months. I let you think you were the hunter, and the whole time I was learning everything about you. She turned back to Varnock. Every time you knocked me down, I learned how you fight. Every time you hurt me, I learned where you are weak. Every bruise on my body is a lesson I paid for in blood. Maya pulled up her sleeve to show the faded marks on her arm. You see these scars and you think they are signs of weakness, but to a human they are proof of survival, proof that we were hurt and we did not die. She let her sleeve fall and fixed Varnock with a stare that made the ancient warrior want to look away. Humans do not eliminate threats through strength. Instructor, we do it through patience. We watch and we learn and we wait. And when we finally move. She glanced at Krathvex. Our prey never sees it coming. The arena remained frozen in stunned silence. Varnock's mind was racing through everything he thought he knew about humans. About prey and predators, about strength and weakness. And he realized that he had been looking at the universe through a lens that was completely wrong. These humans were not weak creatures who had stumbled into space by accident. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. A species forged in fire and blood, shaped by a world so dangerous that only the most adaptable and relentless could survive. They were apex predators wearing the skin of prey. Maya walked toward the exit, and the crowd parted before her like waves before a ship. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back. I expect fair treatment from now on, she said, for me and for every human who comes after. It was not a request. It was a promise of what would happen if her expectation was not met. And then she was gone. The arena remained silent for a long time after Maya left. Finally, one of the dignitaries, an ancient Shalori with silver skin and eyes that had seen 1,000 years, spoke in a voice that trembled slightly. What have we invited into our galaxy? Varnock had no answer. That night, he sat alone in his quarters and composed a new assessment for the Academy Council. He deleted his previous reports about Maya-chan, all the notes about weakness and unsuitability, all the recommendations for removal. He started fresh. Subject: Human Cadet Maya-chan. Previous assessment: negligible threat, unsuitable for Academy training, recommended for removal. Current assessment: Apex Predator, highest suitability for advanced training, recommended for immediate promotion to Elite Track. Additional notes: request complete revision of all human-related threat assessments. Previous classifications were catastrophically incorrect. Humans are not prey species. Repeat, humans are not prey species. Final recommendation: do not provoke, do not underestimate. Do not give them a reason to see us as enemies. He sent the report and leaned back in his chair. Outside his window, the twin suns of Velaris Prime were setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Somewhere in the academy, a human girl was probably studying, learning, preparing for whatever challenge would come next. Varnock had spent his whole life believing that strength was everything. Tonight he learned that patience was stronger. And he made a silent vow to himself. He would never underestimate a human again.